Mrs. Weinberger, we're following up on our interview.
Yes.
This time we are talking about your life during World War II, between 1938 and 1945.
Mm-hmm.
My first question I want to ask is, were you in Germany on November of 1938 during the Kristallnacht?
Well, I was at home.
Where?
You know, I was in our apartment where I lived since I was born. And I was there when the patient came up the stairs to tell my father what was going on in town, in Leipzig. You know, it was the synagogue burning and all this going on. And so, of course, we were scared to go any place. Of course, we were safer at home than any place because the local would not pick us up. They wouldn't. I mean, they didn't pick up my father. They left us alone, actually. But it was dangerous for the people who lived in town. Because where we lived, there were, I think, altogether maybe 3 Jewish families where we lived. And so, and as I said, my father really was very much liked and adored by the local people, and I don't think they would have done anything to him. So I actually only got out, I think probably, maybe it was the following day or 2 days later, that my boyfriend came from town to where we lived. And I remember we were walking in the woods and talking about what was going on. I mean, it was unbelievable. I mean, you really knew that you couldn't stay there anymore. It was impossible. There was no life anymore. And my father had to, he couldn't practice anymore, couldn't make a living anymore. And so it was impossible to stay. The Jewish school was closed because of what was going on in town. And in town, every Jewish men and young men, I think from the age of 18, they picked them up and took them to a concentration camp. Also, I forgot to tell you, I think it happened then that we could no longer go to the movies, or you couldn't sit on park benches except special benches which were painted yellow where Jews could be, and you couldn't go anywhere, to the zoo or any museum or anything, you know, public, you couldn't go anymore. So, no more life. And besides the Nazis, you had to turn in all your precious metals, your silver. You couldn't have a field glass, cameras, God knows what you all had to turn in, which you couldn't have anymore.
Did you know anyone who was a victim of the night who went to a camp?
Went to a camp, my uncle did, who lived in town, and he was picked up on the 9th of November. He was taken to the concentration camp of Buchenwald, and the only way he was released, because my cousin, who had gone to England sometime before, and she was able to get a visa for him, otherwise would have probably died there. Of course, he was a sick man. And the only way they permitted them to get out of the concentration camp is people could leave the country, which was very difficult because it was very difficult to get a visa anywhere. I mean, the U.S. was not open like years ago, where they had a refugee quota when I worked for ICE immigration. They wouldn't let anybody in. I don't know if you remember the ship, the St. Louis.
Yes.
Who was Jewish refugees who I think most of them had a visa for Cuba. And when they came to Cuba, the Cubans wouldn't let them off the ship. And then they went to the States, and the States wouldn't let them in. And they went back to Europe, and many of them were sent to concentration camps and never made it. I remember somebody who was in St. Louis who was able to immigrate. He was here in Baltimore. I mean, he's passed away now, but he lived here for many years. That was a big problem to get a visa, and that's why we applied for Bolivia. It would never occur to us to go to Bolivia, which was pretty rough.
Yes, you have mentioned in our prior interview that you did with Bolivia. Now, before you arrived there, did you already speak Spanish, or did you learn when you were there?
We took lessons in Spanish when we were still at home, but not for a very long time. It was maybe 2 months or something like that. We had Spanish lessons, so that wasn't another problem. You came to a country, you didn't know the language. In school, I had learned English and French, but my French was impossible. So English was much longer. Of course, we learned the British English, but that was somewhat better. But Spanish, I wasn't there long enough really to become fluent in Spanish. I mean, I could make myself understood, but it was not to make a living in. I mean, good living. So, it was very, very tough in the climate, because the altitude in La Paz was thousands of meters high. You could catch your breath. You were out of breath, and the streets were all down, and so you really had to kind of stop walking for a while, take your breath and catch your breath. Eventually, I got used to it, and I was able to swim and exercise again. But it took a couple months to get acclimated. Later, a lot of the refugees who arrived, they went to Cochabamba, which was much lower and was easier to live there than in La Paz and at altitude. And my family, they also moved to Cochabamba later. My sister and family. And of course my father, he went in the Bolivian army. By the way, it's a picture of him in his Bolivian army uniform. I had that photograph when I was in Germany after the war. I went back to Bolivia in 1950 from the States because my nephew had bar mitzvah in Cochabamba. Actually, I saw my father again. It was the last time I saw him. And in fact, I stopped. I flew from New York to Rio, and then from Rio into Bolivia. And the flight I took, it stopped in the place in Bolivia where my father was stationed. And I was there overnight, and then the next day we flew to Cochabamba, where the family lived. And it was very nice to stay for a while. In fact, in 1950 we were already back in Europe again. In 50 we were stationed in Vienna, and I flew from Vienna to Rome, and then from there to Brazil, and then Bolivia. It's quite a journey. So,
Why did you and your family choose to go to Bolivia?
we didn't choose it. Well, my sister Eva, who was married and lived in Berlin, they applied in 38 for visas to Bolivia. And then after, I think it was in October, it was already before the Crystal Night, that my father had to turn in his license. He couldn't work anymore. And so then my brother-in-law suggested that they also apply for visas in Bolivia. And that's what we did. Because you just went any place which gave you a visa, any country that would take you. I mean, there were many German Jews, for instance, who went to Shanghai, to China. And later the Japanese, they made a ghetto in Shanghai. They were in a ghetto during the war, when the Japanese became allies of the Germans during World War II. So it was a matter of luck where you ended up, really.
And you've mentioned in the prior interview that before traveling to Bolivia, you made a stop over in Baltimore. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
And that is where your boyfriend...
Well, he was, at that time he was in Richmond, Virginia, working there. And I sent him a cable from the ship, and I heard that we were going to make a stop in Baltimore, because I was hoping we would be able to meet. I didn't know. And we did, as a matter of fact. We heard that we got married while we were here in Baltimore. In order to facilitate my immigration to this country, because as a wife, you got a visa on a preference quota. You didn't have to wait for the regular visa, and that was the reason. I guess my boyfriend was lucky that when he was waiting for the ship, that he happened to stand next to an immigration officer who put it wise. Otherwise, he probably wouldn't have known about it.
When you two got married, did you have any premonitions that you two would not be seeing each other for a very long time?
Well, we knew that it would be a while that we wouldn't see each other. In fact, when my boyfriend left Germany, I don't know, I showed you the sheet he made where he put put every day on there, and he marked it for 2 years. We thought, we were hoping that we would get together in 2 years, so we made it sooner. Of course, we got married. It was a little more than a year. Because he had left in January '39, and well, of course, we saw each other in March '39 when we got married, and then I got here shortly before our first anniversary in March 1940. I came to this country.
So you were in Bolivia for only about a year?
Yes, yeah, that's all.
What did you do during your time there?
Well, the first job I did there was, they had a children's home for refugee children where parents put their, it was mostly little children, so they could be taken care of while they tried to acclimate and work and so forth. And the person in charge of it was also from Leipzig. She was older than I was, and she was the girlfriend of one of my older sisters. And it was pretty rough because, first of all, I was brand new and had to get acclimated, and from the altitude, you got sick too. You know, I had diarrhea and you throw up and all kinds of things. And I also got a sinus condition in Bolivia there. After a short while, I got another job as a French commercial attaché, taking care of their 2-year-old daughter. And also I had to serve the meals. They had somebody in the kitchen who did the cooking and so forth. I didn't do any housework, but I had to, you know, wait on them. And then when the war broke out on September 1st, they wanted to go back to France, and so I lost my job. And then I got a job with a Bolivian family, and I stayed there until I left for the United States. I worked there. And they're very nice. Of course, one side of the grandparents, I think the mother's parents were originally from Germany, so there was some German influence there. And of course, I had to speak Spanish with the kids and the family. So I speak Spanish. And so you did anything to make a living. The same as in this country too. I did all kinds of things when I first came here. I remember when we arrived in Chile, in Antofagasta, the ship, and then we had to take the train to go to Bolivia, and the train would stop overnight somewhere on the Alto, very high up, and I remember my father was taking care of a lot of people who got sick from the altitude. In the train. So, and your first impression of Bolivia when you see the Indios, you know, the way they were dressed, women, all these white, I don't know how many skirts they had on top of each other, very wide. So, they also didn't speak Spanish. And they were really very primitive. I mean, for instance, the women, they would see all of a sudden, instead of going to the bathroom, they would do it right on the street, you know. They go and all of a sudden you see the water flowing down. I don't think they wore pants, but they did wear these wide skirts. And, yeah.
What did it mean for you to first come across primitive behavior like that?
Well, it's kind of shocking, you know. I mean, as I said, the whole country was so primitive and entirely new way of life. Fortunately, you know, I was young, and you can take things better in your stride than my mother had a very hard time, and my father, I think he could adjust better, but I remember my mother really had a hard time to get adjusted to the way of life there. Everything was more complicated, the cooking and so forth, because things started to cook much quicker, but they weren't done. So, all kind of stuff. So, yeah.
And you left Bolivia in March of 1940.
I left Bolivia actually in February. I got my U.S. visa in November, and I was hoping that I would be able to see my father, that maybe he would come on leave or something, and it didn't work, and the visa is only good for, I think I got my visa at the end of November. It's only good for 4 months, so I had to leave at a certain time, you know, not to forfeit my visa. So I left in February, and I arrived in New York beginning of March 1940. And cousins of my husband, they met me at the ship and put me on the train to Baltimore. Got to Baltimore. And we first rented actually just a room in on what's it? I think Rose Avenue. It was somewhere off Reisterstown Road, past the Park Circle. We lived there a short time, and then what happened? The lady from the National Council of Jewish Women, Flora Dasher, who had met our ship when we came from Germany, and actually her husband offered my husband a job. That's how he came to Baltimore, because it was a better job than he had in Richmond. And Flora Dasher, when I arrived, what she did, I mean, because I had to work too, she took me to Harry Greenstein, who was the executive director of the Associated Jewish Charities of the Federation, and they were located on Monument Street, and hoping he would help to get a job for me, and he did, and I got a job next door at the JCC. They had a cafeteria, and I started working there as a waitress. Of course, my husband was terrible, you know, his wife, a waitress. You know, in Germany, it was not the greatest job to be a waitress, but it was a beginning, and I worked there a couple months, and then I got another job at Camp Woodland, which was also a camp from the Associated, out in Catonsville, and as a counselor, and I got a room there in one of the barracks. All the counselors, they were living in in a room in the barracks, and you had to, of course, watch the kids. But the husband could also stay there, so for a couple months, as long as the camp lasted, we didn't have to pay any rent, which was great. And also he could eat there. But in the morning, he would get a ride with the husband of the leader of the camp. Was Mary Roden was in charge of the camp, and her husband Ferdinand Roden, he had a business in town, and he was driving, so my husband got a ride in the morning and also in the evening to come back. So it was really very, very nice. We could save some money this couple months. And when I got back into, after the camp, I think I got a job at the May Company, which you probably don't remember. It was way before your time. It was store, May Company was later became, I think, Hecht's, when the department stores were on Howard Street. It was Stewart and Hutzler's, Hochschild, May Company. I was a sales girl in the infants department, which was all right unless in winter time when they came with the little kids and you had to try on the leggings, which was quite a job. So I did that for a while, and then I got a job which I really liked, was at Hopkins in the Harriet Lane home in the on the private floor, the children's, and taking care of the charts of the records, which was very interesting, and I really liked it very much. Except then in '43, when my husband was drafted into the Army, I had to get a better paying job. I couldn't make it, even so you get $50 allotment from the Army, but most of it went to long distance calls between us. And then I got a job for the Comfy Manufacturing Company. They made slip covers. They were in Monroe Street. And besides that, I also worked at night when the store, the May Company, when the store was open, as a sales lady to make a little extra money. I think they were open Thursday night, I think just one night a week or something. Not like nowadays when they're open the whole day and night. So, and then, yeah.
Were you the only one in your family that went to America, and did the rest of your family stay in Bolivia? I mean, did the rest of your family stay in Bolivia?
Yeah, except, well, my oldest sister who had gone to Prague in '35, who was in England during the war. She went back to East Germany after the war. And I had another older sister, Irene, who had gone to England, and she stayed in, actually the rest of her life she stayed in London. And the family in Bolivia, in '53, my sister Eva and her family, although they could have come to the States, they had relatives here, my brother-in-law, but their son was of draft age then, and I think it was Korean War then, and so they were afraid to come to this country, and they went to Brazil, and my brothers, who were in La Paz, Willie, the older one, he came to the States. We made papers for him. And the younger one and his family, his wife and daughter, they had gone to Germany. I think my sister-in-law was getting back some property or something, I'm not sure anymore about that. And he thought maybe he could work as a, baker in Germany, but they were not too happy there, so they also came to Baltimore. And the youngest brother, he worked for a while for Nates and Leon's. I don't know if you remember, probably it was before your time on North Avenue, Delicatessen is the baker. And later they had the Pimlico Hotel. They were there, and I don't know. It's all long ago. And the older one also worked as a baker. He worked for caterer for Schleider, caterer for Michal. And then later he worked, I think, at Social Security, also as a baker. And youngest one, he eventually had his own kosher bakery. I don't know if you know Goldman's Bakery. It's my father had bought Goldman's. They were on Rogers Avenue, and from there he moved out to where it is now, Rosterstown Road, and I think 40 years old.
Where did your parents go?
My parents went to Brazil, and my father died in '54 already. My mother died in '67 in Brazil.
What did it mean for you to leave all your family behind to go to Baltimore?
Well, it was tough to be so far apart, and you didn't have the money that you could, travel. It was expensive. Now I can do it easier. I went to see my mother several times, and my sister in Brazil. So, and now it's much easier to have contact with somebody. First of all, with the telephone, with the email, and it's much easier than it used to be. And also, I can afford it more, and I was in Germany in May, and I saw my niece there and her family, and my girlfriend. So it's a different story.
What were your initial feelings when Pearl Harbor was bombed in December of 1941, leading the U.S. into the war?
The bad part was that we had everything ready for my mother-in-law to leave Germany, and when Pearl Harbor came, it stopped everything, and she was deported and perished eventually. It was very, very exciting, and you hated the Japanese guts, really, of what they did. course, was Germany declaring war too, and the big wish to get back at them, finally get them. Although it took quite a while, and a lot of people perished, got killed. In fact, my husband, you know, he was drafted, and he was in the army, and they were looking for people, you know, German-speaking people, and for the OSS, you know, who would go behind lines and stuff like that, and he thought he was going to do that, but then he got second thoughts and said, if they catch him, you know, it'd be the worst thing could happen. And he decided not to do that. Eventually he, from Camp Fannin in Texas, he was transferred to Camp Ritchie in Maryland, and which was intelligence. And there were quite a few German refugees at Ritchie taking their training there. And in fact, I was in Camp Fannin when he got the orders to go to Ritchie. And we were going back to Maryland the same train, except he had a sleeper and I had to sit up. The trains during the war were, what was going on, it was impossible. They were packed, and you were lucky if you got a seat. It was terrible. So, what I did during the war too, when the war broke out, I worked for the USO. They had I guess, on Saturday night at the JCC on Monument Street, they would have, you know, we had like a cafeteria where we would make sandwiches and all kinds of food for the GIs who came in. And in the social hall there, they had dance and, you know, to entertainment. So I worked there every Saturday night at the USO. So I still contribute to them because I think they do a good job.
During the war, did you have any idea of the kind of atrocities Hitler was committing back in Europe against the Jews?
Gradually, you started hearing things, but it took quite a while, you know, of course we were all worried and concerned, people who were left behind. Well, we didn't find out about my mother-in-law until after the war, really, because you had no way of communicating once they were in the concentration camp. And I had a number of my relatives. I don't think there's a Jewish family in Europe that didn't lose anybody. So I had, you know, cousins and uncles and aunts, both sides of the family. And some who emigrated, you know, I had, was a cousin of my father's, and his aunt and uncle, they went to South Africa. You went wherever you could get a visa, so the people are really all over the world. And it was very, very tough. In fact, today, this chain, the real pearls, they belong to my mother-in-law. And when she was, you know, still in Germany, it was before the war. I guess it must have been maybe before Kristallnacht. That one of her nieces who was living in Paris she gave it to her to get out of Germany. And she had a sister in the States who had emigrated to New York, and when she visited, she gave it to her, and when I came, she gave it to me. Yeah, and the earrings, my husband, they were buttons for the tuxedo shirts, which he got to his bar mitzvah, and had earrings made out of it, so stuff like that. Of course, you couldn't take any jewelry, you had to turn it in. I mean, you couldn't take anything out after crystal night. And the money got, I think it was $3 worse, could take out. It's when you start thinking about it, I mean, impossible, to believe it, that people can do that to somebody else.
Your family members that went to concentration camps, do you know exactly which ones they went to?
Hmm?
Do you know exactly which concentration camps your family members went to?
Well, my mother-in-law was deported to Riga, which was a ghetto, I guess, and from there she was sent, we don't know. And most of them from Germany were sent to the east, to Poland or Lithuania, or occupied, where they, I guess, could do more freely than they did in Germany. And, last week I went to a meeting at the Enoch Pratt Library. They were talking about the International Tracing Service in Arles and open its files, records. And in my work, I've been contacting them for many, many years, since I started working in '55 and processing claims of survivors. We had to get confirmation of which camps they were, from the International Tracing Service, and many times we got the record, confirmation from them. It's amazing. They would keep records like that, what they did to people.
What did you think of the U.S. getting involved in the war?
The U.S.?
Yes.
Well, I think I remember when I was working for Comfy, and I had to relieve the switchboard, and when D-Day came, I was listening to the radio at the switchboard about the invasion. Well, we were very excited, and especially, I guess, after D-Day, when the U.S., when they got into France and really were taking care of the Germans, finally had to give up, and of course they came from the other side too, the Russians. But they deserved every bit they got. And I remember coming in to Germany in '46, and they were really, I mean, they were very bad. First of all, the bombing, I mean, that had gone on. I mean, I was in Munich and worked there, and the destruction, and they had nothing to eat. I remember I was smoking then. If you smoked a cigarette on the street, they would follow you until you would throw the butt away. In fact, cigarettes were really the money. They were worth more than the German mark wasn't worth a damn thing. And so I remember this Meissen bowl I got in Munich there in the center. And I got this for 2 cartons of cigarettes. And I think it's worth about $300, $400 worth. So,
so pretty.
it was, and then when the change came, when they came out with the D-mark, things changed. I mean, they seemed to come to life a little more after the money was worth something. And all of a sudden you saw goods in the stores, and it was in '48, I think, when the money change came. I felt a certain gratification when I came back to Germany. I saw them, you know, how miserable it was, and especially not the young people, I mean, you know, because but anybody my age and older, it was very gratifying to see that they had nothing. They really had a tough time. But, yeah, it's still, when you think of it, it's still difficult to believe that something like this could take place. I mean, what's going on in Auschwitz, I mean, the little boy of my older sister, he was killed in Auschwitz. Of course, the stories I've heard, you know, with my experience is nothing to the many stories I've been working on claims since 1955, and I still do. And what people went through, it's unbelievable. I remember the letter I read to you, which I got from this. In fact, she wrote a book too about her experiences.
Any of your friends or neighbors here in Baltimore, were they ever drafted into the war against Europe?
Were they what?
Were they ever drafted into the war?
Against the war?
No, in the war against Europe.
Oh, yeah, I mean, there were a number of, you know, our friends who were drafted, because my husband, he became a citizen only when he was in the army. When he was drafted, he was not a citizen yet. And I remember I was there when they were all sworn in with a lot of GIs who became citizens at the same time. they couldn't even, I mean, not being a citizen, they couldn't even volunteer for service, as far as I know. But a lot of, you know, the German Jewish boys who came, they were in service, were in the army. Majority that I know who were friends of ours, they were all in the army. And they gladly served because, you know, it gave them a chance to do something which they couldn't do before. Fight. I remember the rationing during the war. Remember what certain things, I think coffee and butter and stuff like that. Managed.
When your husband was drafted,
Yeah.
did he feel like he had the need to just go over there and fight back against the Germans for what they were doing?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah. He, as I said, when he first came in and they were looking for people for the OSS, he had said yes, he would do it, and then until he started thinking, my God, it's crazy, you know, if you get caught, they really kill you. And so he didn't do it, but he went through infantry training in Camp Fannin in Texas. And then, of course, he went to Ritchie, and later after Ritchie, I know they had a POW camp somewhere here in the States where they had German prisoners, and I know he had to interrogate, and later he was at the Pentagon where they interrogated German staff officers who were prisoners of war to get information from them about, you know, the German army and so forth. So I guess he felt pretty good of what he did to get back at them. And then, of course, in Nuremberg, he interpreted with translator. He interpreted for General Taylor, Telfer Taylor, who was in charge in Nuremberg. And, I know I went to one of the, I sat in sometimes to the doctor's trial, which was unbelievable, but the Mengele, what he did in Auschwitz, those people kind of tests and killing people.
Was there anyone you knew who was part of the liberation of the concentration camps?
Yeah, there's somebody here in Baltimore. Memory. Sal Goldstein. He liberated, let's see, I don't know if he liberated, I think Dachau. I think he liberated Dachau concentration camp, and usually he talks about it. Sometimes when we talk to students at school, you know, at schools, and he will talk about his experience liberating the camp. Yeah, it must have been very gratifying, although some people didn't live very long because they were in such poor shape. And I was at Buchenwald. So of course, it was a long time after I was in Germany. I think it probably was still East Germany then when I was there. And so when you see all the ovens and all this kind of, they had it there too. It's still unbelievable that something like this could take place. And but I don't understand how people can do that to each other. I mean, you had these Germans, they were shooting people by the thousands, and that it didn't affect them in any way. I can't understand that. What was going on, when the Germans went to Russia. I mean, it's unbelievable what they did in the Ukraine there. Thousands and thousands of people were killed. The Babi Yar and all these places.
How did your friend describe liberating the camp, Dachau?
Well, it must have been extremely exciting, I would think, to come in there and to be able to liberate, the fellow Jews. I mean, there were others too, but most of them were Jewish in the concentration camps. I think I was Dachau. I also saw, and then I saw one in Austria. In Austria, then you had the Cold War with the Russians, which wasn't nice either. And I remember we lived in Vienna, and in order to get out of Vienna to the American zone, you had to drive through the Russian zone, and you needed a permit pass to do that. What happened to us a couple times, that Russian soldiers, they would be standing on the street with a rifle and they stopped the car and they were hitching a ride. I mean, that's the way they were hitching a ride. Getting in the car, sitting there next to you with a machine gun, pretty scary. Fortunately, nothing happened, but we were always happy when we got through arrived in Linz from Vienna. It was a couple hours ride. And of course in Vienna itself they had all the first district. They would change every month. Another power would have the first district to change of the guards between the US, the Russians, the French, and the British. It was a big ceremony. We had the same thing in Berlin too. The Russians scared me too. don't know, I guess it's what they tell you from the outside, what you read in the papers and so forth, it influences you a great deal, how you feel and judge things. Actually, it took quite a while that we found out things of what was going on in Germany. We got news about it. It was quite a while. Well, in the beginning, there was still mail going back and forth, but you really couldn't write freely because there was censorship. So, but then mail stopped completely.
When the war ended in 1945,
Yeah.
did you want to go to Europe and try to find any family members that were still there?
Well, you try to find out what happened, to members of your family, and it took quite a while. Well, you could get information in some of the Jewish communities, because they would have records of when people were deported, so you could find out when they were. I mean, that's how we found out about my mother-in-law or other relatives, by contacting the Jewish community at, in Leipzig or wherever. We had relatives in Frankfurt and in Bautzen, and find out what eventually happened to them. That's the way I could find out. And then, of course, eventually from the International Tracing Service in Arlington, by writing to them. And they would have information.
What was the American Jewish community doing when they found what was going on in Germany?
Well, actually, I don't really know if well, the American Jewish community, they were helping the refugees when they came here. As I said, that when I arrived, I was taken to the executive director, who happened to be a friend of Floridash, of the Associated Jewish Charities here. And I remember that they were helping the refugees.
Did you take part in helping the refugees?
Hmm?
Did you take part in helping the refugees?
Well, we kind of helped each other too. There were organizations. There was here in Baltimore was the social club, and there was a cosmopolitan club, and we were members, and there was social activity. People got together, and I know in summertime we went to the beach. Had a beach which they rented and made arrangements for bus or transportation and so forth. So in the beginning, we really had more contact with the other German refugees than with the Americans. I mean, it took a while to do that. And also we joined the Hevra, which was a burial society, but in the beginning it also had social activities. And until a couple of years ago, they also usually had a luncheon or something for the senior citizen of the members, but it stopped. I guess the seniors are kind of dying out. And new members to the Chevra are mostly very Orthodox American Jews. Yeah, when we first came here, there was actually, you know, the people we got together were other refugees mostly, because you had so much in common, really, you know, trying to settle down and make a new life. And so at that time our English wasn't that great, so we still talked German. So I remember I used to get German books at the library, the Enoch Pratt had German books. So now it's just the opposite. I prefer to read English more than I read German.
One last question.
Yeah.
You helping out the refugees after the war and after the Holocaust, did that inspire you to do what you do now today?
Well,
work with survivors.
What happened actually is the following. I worked, had connections with the Associated really right from the beginning, and I started working for the Jewish Welfare Fund, I think in '45. At that time, Jewish Welfare Fund had its own campaign, separated from the Associated campaign. And Jewish Welfare Fund, they collected money for overseas agencies and for Israel and so forth. Well, the Associated was more for local. And so when and I worked during the campaign, I worked in the women's division, you know, during campaign and so forth. So I was always involved in something like this. And when I came back from Europe in '53, at first it didn't work. And I worked during the campaign for the women's division for a few weeks, and I got a ride home with the director of Highest of Baltimore. It was in July '55, and he needed help. He was also from Germany. He was he had studied law, and I think he was an attorney, but I think he, in Germany it was different when somebody studied law. I think at first they worked for the state, something, and of course he got kicked out when the Nazis came, and he emigrated to the US. And so he was involved, he got involved with the claims of survivors, and he needed help. And I really was very reluctant because it was summer, and I really always didn't like to work during the summer, possibly. But anyway, I started to work, and I started working on claims. And when I started working for Highest, that's actually what I did. I was more involved in that than in the immigration part of it. And at that time we were processing, well, the survivors who came from the displaced persons camps after the war. filed their claim for, first one was for deprivation of liberty, who were in the camps. And so I got involved in all these stories. We had to prepare a statement, first to fill out forms and prepare a statement of the claimant, where he, was born such and such, and such and such happened. This camp, I was had to start wearing the Jewish star, and then the ghetto, and then the concentration camp, and whatever. And so I got very much involved in this. After deprivation of liberty claim, we usually filed a claim for damage to health. Most of them suffered damage to their health. Mostly the recognized thing was emotional problems, depression, and so forth. And the people who came from Germany, who lived in Germany, they could file many more claims than the people who come from the occupied areas. People who had lived in Germany, they could file for damage to their career. For instance, I could file for interruption of education and stuff like that, and also for loss of property and so forth. So they could file many more claims than the people from the occupied areas. So, when the director died it was the end of '64, and I started acting as director, and I did that for 2 years, and I thought I might as well become director and get paid for it instead. But because I was very reluctant, because it meant you had a board and board meetings and all this kind of stuff, besides working on cases. But the work was very gratifying. It was very interesting. The immigration part, and having them become citizens, and filing their claims and getting results. So even after I retired, I continued working on claims. I still do. And become part of my life. But it was very, very interesting work, I must say. And what I liked, that you eventually saw results. First of all in immigration, eventually after years and years looking at the file, trying to get them, you finally could go to the airport and meet the people, and it was wonderful and getting the money for them. We've got quite a bit of money. I think we have over $13 million, which does not include pensions, which go back. The pension payments were retroactive to '53. So it's a lot of money. And it has helped people a great deal, to get this money. And, I think the clients really appreciated them still there. And it's good for me to be active and doing things. Yeah, I wanted to show you the this was the Aufgabe. It was published in in New York, and now it comes from Switzerland. It used to be, it was started, I
Cool.
guess, in the late 30s by German refugees, and was published in New York. That's a new one.
Got it.
Yeah. I don't know what else to say. Oh, a couple of years ago, I was the Jewish community in Leipzig, to which we belonged. They invited their former members of people who lived there, and I went. It was about 3-4 years ago that I went, and it was very, very interesting. And I remember some years ago there was a student. She was studying medicine, and she wanted to write. I think it was her doctor's thesis about the Jewish doctors in Leipzig, and I had to tell her the story of my father, and it was written up, and so it was very nice. So all kinds of things going on. Yeah, all kinds of things that came out. Here's something about Jewish doctors in Leipzig. But some years ago, quite a number of years ago, we used to meet in New York former people from the Jewish community from Leipzig. I mean, who were in the sport club or in the youth group, but it stopped because people aren't there anymore. So it's getting less and less. So what else can I tell you?
I believe that's it.
That's it.
Okay.
Mrs. Weinberger, thank you very much for your time again.